Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. Today, we'll be diving into the world of server hardening tools, how they work, their strengths and weaknesses, and how to choose the right one for your needs. I am Ben, and to guide us through this topic today, we are honored to have with us CalCom's CEO, Roy Ludmir. With over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity, Roy will be sharing with us expert insights into server hardening, key challenges, and how automation can transform your security strategy. Over to you, Roy.
Good morning, Ben, and thank you everybody for joining. Um, as Ben mentioned, today we're going to have a brief overview of server hardening in general and talk more specifically about the following agenda, with the focus of hardening tools and what you need to keep in mind when you are facing a hardening project and looking into the world of different hardening tools. So the agenda for the day will cover topics from server hardening and what it looks now in 2025, a bit of overview of manual hardening procedures versus using hardening tools for hardening automation. What is server hardening tools? What is out there in the market? Different practices, different strategies when it comes to performing your hardening. But most importantly, we'll dive into the difference between the potential hardening tools and some additional tools that maybe serve for other things which are not necessarily direct hardening of your servers. So when we look into the world of hardening or what is actually server hardening, just to avoid any confusion, in the base of probably every security framework or best practice, the topic of configuration hardening is coming up, and for a good reason. The idea of server hardening is to make sure that we are avoiding any built-in vulnerabilities that exist at the configuration level of operating systems or applications that by default are manufactured or configured for optimal operation of installation of applications, but not necessarily taking into consideration the topic of security, which nowadays is becoming more critical with strict regulations and, of course, cyber attacks that we are seeing all over. And the idea behind hardening is to take all these default configurations and to secure them. It means that we're going to perform changes on the servers, on the operating system level, to make sure any configuration vulnerabilities are removed. So just to cover what do we actually mean when we're saying server hardening? Now, we do see some increase or first increase in the requirement to perform hardening, but also as the scope of security and complexity of operations and infrastructures are evolving, we are seeing new challenges that we haven't necessarily seen in the past. And maybe a few of the points that are nowadays making the topic of hardening way more challenging than before are related to, first of all, the increase of the pace of work. We're seeing the infrastructures growing, way more servers that are deployed on-prem and in the cloud in a much faster pace than we used to see before, more applications that are being provisioned, business requirements that are pushing IT teams to work much faster, and security need to keep in the pace of the same work. And it's always a challenge. It's always a challenge to keep up with the speed of operations and to push security and inject it into these processes. And it is the same when it comes to server hardening. More servers, more applications means we need more people to perform hardening actions, hardening procedures on the servers. Now, it's not just that the infrastructure is growing faster, it is also the attack side of things, or cybersecurity in general, and cyber threats that are evolving way faster due to AI-based attacks that are exposing more vulnerabilities than we've seen before. And this is causing more remediation requirements and affecting also what we call the server hardening benchmarks, such as the CIS benchmarks, etc. The best practice for hardening these days are way longer and more in-depth than we've seen 2 and definitely 5 years ago. And these two things combined are just causing a ongoing or consistent growth of the complexity of server hardening in general. So implementing hardening today compared to what we were seeing 5 or 7 years ago it is way more complex and requires a lot more effort from IT teams and security teams, of course. Now, when we dive into actually what is happening now in the industry, I think the main topic that is pushing organizations to deal with this topic of hardening is definitely regulations. And regulations today, and we can see everything from the health sector, HIPAA, PCI DSS, local banking regulations, state regulations. In the end of the day, 5 years ago, we were seeing that the regulations or the frameworks were coming and asking to have like a hardening policy, as an example. Nowadays, the requirement is to perform hardening according to a known best practice, for example, the CIS benchmarks. But it's not just the regulation itself, it is also how it is being audited. So we are seeing more and more organizations that are frequently being audited by either internal or external auditors. And the auditors are not just coming and asking, hey, do you have a hardening policy? No, they are going and testing and checking and demanding to see that there is a proper implementation of hardening, that it is well documented, that if there are exceptions, they should be recorded, and there should be a reason why an exception is created in a hardening policy over a server. So it is now real. It's not just about managing or maintaining a document. It is about implementing. Okay. And on top of it, we have everything related to frameworks. So NIST cybersecurity frameworks, CIS critical security controls. All of these frameworks are becoming best practices for every CISO around the world to just adjust, to adapt and to use. And of course, usually in the top 5 topics, hardening is coming, and it is a basic requirement nowadays. And maybe the last point is related to the update cycle of I would say first vulnerabilities and therefore also the benchmarks. It is not anymore the topic of, hey, we pushed some GPOs, we did some basic hardening, and maybe we'll audit it once every 3 years. We are seeing an increased number of vulnerabilities that are related to configurations, and therefore the cycle of updating our policies is something that need to be managed and controlled. Together with these changes in the cybersecurity or regulatory landscape, of course, there are changes to infrastructures in general, and nowadays we are starting to adapt Windows Server 2025. Of course, it means new policies, new hardening standards. Soon we will probably start to see Red Hat Enterprise 10 as another flavor or version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux that will have its own requirements, its own vulnerabilities, and these new upgrades on update or adoption of new servers are causing more complexity when it comes to hardening. And this, of course, comes with the security aspect of implementing zero trust at the enterprise. So zero trust without doing the initial phases of course, patching, hardening, privilege access, etc. You cannot really implement zero trust without performing proper hardening, and therefore a lot of it is being also pushed by zero trust projects and initiatives. And of course, the movement to the cloud, if it's IaaS, if it's adoption of any applications that are hosted in the cloud, this is of course causing more complexities and additional infrastructures that need to be hardened. Now, when we dive into the topic of hardening, we'll usually see that the go-to is just the manual procedure. hey, we're going to take a benchmark. Hopefully, this is something robust or best practice like CIS benchmarks, or maybe a state level kind of advisory that provided hardening requirements or hardening recommendations. And the first thing that every IT team or security team will do is of course, assess the current posture. When I'm saying assessing the current posture, is about scanning. You can take any type of scanner, audit tool that can tell you what is going on currently in the environment. And then the next thing will be determining the gaps. What is actually not closed? What is it that we need to remediate? What is it that we need to harden? But one of the main topics we're seeing with hardening, or main challenges, is actually related to the impact. So before we are deploying any change, we need to first test and evaluate what will be the impact of a change that is deployed on a server running in production. And this can, of course, take its time when it's done with using manual methods. But when you are after you're performing the test, then it is about, of course, deploying. And in deploying, we usually mean running a script, or maybe even manually running the configuration on the computer. Some more automated ways might be GPOs or CM tools that we'll discuss later today, but we need to find a way how to deploy these configurations and hardening on top of hundreds or thousands of servers. And then, of course, we need to repeat this process. So there is a new vulnerability, there is a new hardening requirement. We determine, we test, we determine the gaps, we test, we manually deploy. And during the life cycle of the hardening, of course, we need to monitor and make sure that there are no configuration drifts. So this is what we'll usually see when using manual server hardening procedures. And using the manual way might cause some mistakes or challenges or failures through the hardening procedure that, in the bottom line, is causing the infrastructure not to be compliant. Some of what we're seeing is the topic which is related to scalability. So if you are working in a manual procedure, scaling to hundreds of machines or thousands of machines is time consuming. If you're really looking to do it in a complete manual procedure, you're probably seeing a project of thousands of hours, okay? And this is only to achieve just an initial baseline. So we want to go beyond this initial baseline into something that will make us comply or help us comply with a more robust benchmark or policy like CIS benchmarks that will then take even longer to implement. But let's say that we already invested all of this time and effort into the hardening procedures. The issue of misconfigurations or removal of the hardening from the server is something that we'll see a lot. And in the end of the day, it means that preserving the level of compliance with manual methods is pretty challenging. So if we understand that these topics or challenges are caused through manual hardening, most organizations, or what we recommend, is to look into different tools that might help. These tools can definitely save you a lot of time, can help you achieve continuous compliance, minimize the downtime associated with performing hardening, and of course, scale the solution and manage it in an enterprise environment the proper way. And when we look into hardening tools, there are few different groups of tools that are maybe associated with the hardening projects. Not necessarily all of them are hardening tools, okay? And we do see a lot of confusion here in this case, and we'll maybe group these three different kind of tools, where the first group will be the compliance scanners. The second one is the configuration management tools. And the last one is the one that we are seeing as dedicated tools for hardening automations, and we'll recommend looking into them. Are, again, tools that were built from scratch to support hardening automation procedures. So let's have a quick review of the different groups of tools. And we're starting with the compliance scanners. And the idea of a compliance scanner is just like it sounds. It's to scan for compliance. Okay, you can see here a variety of tools, starting from basic ones like the CIS CAD that can take a single machine, compare it against the CIS benchmark, and provide to you a compliance score. Of course, it's a percentage of compliance through the most shiny and advanced tools like the Tenable and Qualys type of tools of the world, where you can scan compliance on top of thousands of machines and, of course, get different metrics and dive into the different benchmarks, etc. Um, but in the end of the day, all of these tools are just performing the comparison. They will scan your infrastructure and tell you what is your compliance score. I like to say that they are a great first step into a hardening project, but they are definitely not the final procedure because they are not performing the hardening. They are just telling you where are the problems. We'll usually see them used by the security teams. The second group of tools are automation tools or configuration management tools that have the capability to control the configuration of a given endpoint or server. Okay, they can push some script through an agent. It can be cookbooks with Chef or any type of automation runbooks that are performed using usually a dedicated um, software language with this tool, with this type of tools. And potentially they can be used also to perform the actual hardening of servers. The question is, were they designed to manage hundreds of thousands of servers through this type of a hardening project? And what it takes to do it? I mean, what type of resources are required? What type of level of skilled engineers are required to come and develop these cookbooks or basically hardening scripts that the same CM agent will then push to the machine. And not just that, these tools usually won't have a proper hardening procedure tool or process related to assessing the impact, ongoing monitoring of the policies, proper rollbacks, things that you would probably want when you are managing a complex hardening procedure or hardening project in your infrastructure. So, of course, under this family, we will find Puppet, Chef, Ansible, tools like NMT, Netrix these days, tools that can basically change the configuration of a machine. And the last group, or what we would recommend looking into when it comes to a hardening project, dedicated hardening project of hundreds or thousands of servers, are tools that were designed from scratch to deal with this topic of hardening. And usually these tools are not designed or not used by the security teams, like the scanners, the compliance scanners. They are usually designed to be used by the infrastructure operations teams that are managing the servers in our case. And these tools are usually designed, or these tools are designed to see an entire hardening process, which means throughout the life cycle of usage of the server in the infrastructure, from its provisioning to decommissioning, changes of applications, etc. Of course, with the understanding that changing the configuration is not the actual challenge, but how can we make the changes without breaking applications? How can this support both the security aspects of the hardening, but more importantly, the operational aspects, what the infrastructure engineers needs in order to perform the hardening in a proper way. And finding this thin line between operations and security is highly critical in this process of hardening, because we don't want to be in a situation where, yes, our servers are secured and compliant, but our infrastructure is down. So that's a very important thing to remember. Of course, we want to simplify this process as much as possible. We want to make sure that this is a process which is easy to maintain in our infrastructure, and we don't need few engineers dealing with it on a daily basis. And the last thing is to make sure that the whole hardening project is cost effective, that we're not spending here thousands of hours or even hundreds of hours to harden few hundred servers. Other than hardening tools or some less commercial ways to deal with hardening is of course open source tools. So we will see that they are usually used by smaller organizations, or where the hardening procedure is not that critical, or the infrastructure is not so critical, or on the other hand, the engineering task force have the capability to deal with reconfiguring software components like open source tools. Of course, when it's taken into enterprise environments, it's always important to remember that this type of open source projects or tools have limited support, and the learning curve of using them and adapting them into our environment might be pretty long. Okay, so the time to market or time to see value from a solution might take a while, but open source tools are also there. The bottom line here is that we want to make sure that the best practices are implemented the proper way. So we have seen that there are various type of tools, from scanning through automation tools, through dedicated hardening tools, and some open source capabilities. But it is always very important for us to first be proactive in the process. By being proactive, we mean that we're not just scanning and waiting for something to happen. We want to lead the project in a proper way, in an automated way. We want to make sure that we have the proper tool in our hands to make sure that we're not making mistakes, that we're not breaking things, that this hardening initiative is not coming something that is postponed or being pushed to the end of the line of our IT projects for the year because we don't have the proper tools and the proper expertise. And therefore, choosing the right tool that will help you lead this project in a proper way is something that is very, very important. Where do we start? Today's presentation was about understanding the landscape of hardening. What are the different possible hardening tools, or different groups of hardening tools, or tools that can serve you through a hardening process. Here at CalCom, we are dealing with hardening for over 15 years now. It's not just a product that we are providing, it's also the expertise and knowledge how to approach this type of project. We are happy to help and assist if you have any questions to any of our, or you would like to talk to an expert about any of these tools that we discussed today. We are more than happy to set a call and provide additional information. Other than that, thank you for today's time.